The towering pines stood like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching long and dark as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air was still, almost too still, as if the forest was holding its breath. I had come out here to find some peace, to escape the chaos of the city. But now, as the light began to fade, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. It started with a twig snapping somewhere behind me. The sharp sound echoed in the oppressive silence, and my heart skipped a beat. I stopped walking, straining to listen. There it was again, a rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. Who or what was out there? I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the dense trees. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow flitting between the trees. It was too quick to be sure, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I bolted. Heart pounding, I weaved through the trees, not daring to look back. My breath came in ragged gasps, and every step seemed to echo like a drumbeat in the stillness. I didn't stop until I found a dense thicket to crouch behind. Gasping for breath, I listened intently, praying that whatever was following me hadn't kept up. The forest was silent again, but now the silence felt different, heavier, as if the trees themselves were watching. Had it really been a person? Or just a trick of the light? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Trust no one, I reminded myself. But what if my own mind was playing tricks on me? I stayed hidden for what felt like an eternity, every muscle tense, every sense on high alert. Slowly, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. I couldn't stay here forever. I had to move, had to find a way out of this forest before darkness fell completely. I forced myself to stand, muscles protesting after the prolonged crouch. Just as I started to relax, a new sound pierced the air, a rustle, louder this time, closer. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The chase was far from over. Whatever was out there was still coming for me. The fear surged back, stronger than before. I had to move, had to stay ahead of whatever was hunting me. With one last glance into the shadowy depths of the forest, I took off again, praying. Branches slapped at my face as I ran, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind me. The forest was turning into a maze of shadows and fear. Every step I took felt like a desperate gamble, hoping to stay one step ahead of whatever was chasing me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I threw myself under a fallen tree, the space barely wide enough to fit my trembling body. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. I pressed myself against the cold, rough bark, trying to make myself as small as possible. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, but I knew I needed a moment to catch my breath and listen. The crunch of leaves and the snap of twigs underfoot grew louder. I could hear the pursuer's footsteps, slow and deliberate, each one sending a jolt of terror through my body. My breath was shallow, my body frozen in terror. Any moment, they could find me. Was it really a person? Or just another trick of the light? My mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt. Trust no one, not even myself. The shadows seemed to move, dancing at the edge of my vision, and every rustle of leaves felt like a whisper of doom. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to silence the pounding in my head. A shadow passed just inches from my hiding spot. I held my breath, every muscle screaming to move, but I stayed still, praying they wouldn't see me. The moments stretched into eternity, each second a torturous wait for the inevitable discovery. The footsteps receded, and I finally exhaled. Relief flooded through me, but it was fleeting. I knew they would be back. I had to keep moving. Staying hidden meant only delaying the inevitable. Slowly, I began to crawl out from under the tree, every movement careful and measured. My heart still pounded in my chest, my body tense and ready to bolt at the slightest sound. The forest around me was a labyrinth of shadows, each one potentially hiding another threat. Just as I started to stand, I heard it again, a rustle, louder this time, and much closer. My heart sank. They were still out there. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let fear control me, not now. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The chase was far from over, and the forest offered no sanctuary. With one last look around, I took off again, pushing through the underbrush, my eyes scanning for the next hiding spot. The night was closing in, and with it, the promise of even greater dangers. But I couldn't afford to think about that now. All that mattered was staying ahead of the pursuer, staying alive for just a little longer. The shadows deepened, and the forest seemed to close in around me. I ran, driven by fear. The rustling grew louder, closer, as I pushed through the dense underbrush. My legs ached, but stopping was not an option. Panic was a constant companion, making each step feel like a desperate race against an unseen clock. The forest around me was a nightmare of shadows and whispers, every sound a potential threat. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, twisting into grotesque shapes that vanished as soon as I looked directly at them. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt, each passing moment intensifying the paranoia that gripped me. A branch snapped to my right, and I whirled around, ready to run again. But it was just a squirrel, darting up a tree. My nerves were frayed, and every sound felt like a harbinger of doom. Was it really just a squirrel, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. As I stumbled through the forest, the paranoia grew stronger. Was I losing my mind? I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every sound, every shadow seemed out to get me. Could I trust my own senses? The fear of not knowing was almost worse than the fear of the pursuer. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of madness. I found a small clearing, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the ground. I slumped against a large rock, trying to calm my racing heart and make sense of my jumbled thoughts. The forest seemed quieter here, almost peaceful, but I knew better than to let my guard down. The quiet was deceiving, a false sense of security. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I was safe. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the pursuer was just a figment of my imagination, a product of fear and exhaustion. But just as I started to convince myself it was all in my head, a new sound broke the silence, a low, menacing growl. The fear surged back, stronger than ever. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, and the low growl grew louder. My breath caught in my throat. They were here, and they were close. Too close. The brief respite had been nothing more than a cruel joke. The reality of my situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless and terrified. I knew I had to move, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. The growl came again, closer this time, and I forced myself to stand. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The shadow at the edge of the clearing seemed to grow, taking on a more menacing shape. The growl echoed in my ears as I sprinted through the darkening forest. Each step felt heavier, each shadow more menacing. The forest seemed to come alive with whispers and rustling leaves, every sound amplifying my fear. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding like a drumbeat of impending doom. I had to keep moving. Stopping meant death. I burst through the trees and skidded to a halt at the edge of a wide river. The current was swift and unforgiving, a barrier I hadn't anticipated. Panic surged through me. How was I supposed to cross? The water looked icy, its dark surface hiding unknown depths. But the growl behind me left no room for hesitation. I plunged into the river, the icy water biting into my skin like 1,000 needles. Each step was a battle against the current, my muscles straining with the effort. The water tugged at me, trying to pull me under, but I couldn't afford to be swept away. Not now. Not with them so close behind. The water rose to my chest, the cold seeping into my bones. My legs felt like lead, each movement a struggle. I stumbled on a submerged rock, nearly losing my footing. For a moment, the current pulled me under, water filling my mouth and nose. I kicked desperately, breaking the surface with a gasp. I couldn't let the river take me. I had to keep going. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the far bank. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, my body shaking from the cold and the exertion. The river was a temporary barrier, but how long would it keep them at bay? I had to keep moving. The thought of those shadowy figures crossing the river filled me with renewed terror. A splash behind me sent a jolt of fear through my body. They were crossing the river. I couldn't rest. Not yet. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting, and started running again. The forest ahead was even denser, the underbrush thick and unforgiving. Thorns snagged my clothes, and branches scratched my skin, but I had to keep moving. The thought of slowing down was unbearable. The underbrush thickened, turning every step into a struggle. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my feet slipping on the damp ground. The growls behind me grew louder, closer. They were relentless. The dense thicket opened up into a small clearing, and I took the opportunity to catch my breath. My chest heaved, and my limbs felt like they were made of lead. I scanned the area for any sign of the pursuer, but all I saw were shadows and the flickering light of the moon. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I had a chance to escape. But the sound of splashing water behind me shattered that illusion. They were crossing the river, and they were close. Panic surged through me again. I had to move. I had to find a way out. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, an impenetrable maze of shadows and fear. I pushed on, the underbrush tearing at my clothes and skin. The forest was a relentless adversary, each step a battle against the terrain. My legs ached, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. The growls were closer now, almost upon me. The ground began to slope upwards, the incline steep and rocky. I stumbled, my hands scraping against rough stone as I climbed. The trees thinned out, replaced by jagged rocks and loose gravel. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat of fear. I could feel the pursuer closing in, their presence like a dark cloud hanging over me. I reached the top of the slope and found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. The ground crumbled beneath my feet, sending pebbles tumbling into the abyss below. The ravine stretched out before me, a gaping maw of darkness. There was no way across. I was trapped. Behind me, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Panic surged through me, my mind racing for a solution. I scanned the area, desperate for any way out. But there was nothing. The ravine was too wide to jump, too deep to climb down. I was cornered. The growls grew closer, the shadows shifting as my pursuers emerged from the underbrush. I could see them now, dark figures moving with predatory grace. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. There was no escape. The forest had trapped me, and my relentless pursuers were closing in for the kill. I backed up to the edge of the ravine, the ground crumbling under my heels. My mind raced, searching for any way out. But there was nothing. No escape. No sanctuary. Just the relentless approach of my pursuers and the gaping abyss behind me. As the first of the dark figures stepped into the clearing, I took a deep breath and prepared to fight. I could feel the ground crumbling beneath my feet as the dark figures moved closer. My heart pounded, my mind racing for any way out. The ravine yawned open behind me, a drop that promised certain death if I miscalculated. Desperation clawed at me, each breath a struggle against the overwhelming fear. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a narrow ledge snaking along the ravine wall. It was risky, but it was my only chance. I took a deep breath and leapt, my fingers scrambling for purchase on the rocky surface. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for my feet, but it held. I inched along, the stone cold and unforgiving beneath my hands. The sound of my pursuers faded slightly, their confusion giving me a momentary advantage. I reached the other side and pulled myself up, collapsing on the ground. The cool air was a welcome relief, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to hope I might survive this nightmare. I found a small cave tucked into the side of the ravine and crawled inside. The darkness was comforting, wrapping around me like a protective blanket. I leaned against the rough stone wall, my breath slowing as I tried to gather my thoughts. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of safety. But could I really trust my senses? The forest had played tricks on me before, turning harmless sounds into sinister threats. My mind was a battlefield of paranoia and fear. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not even for a second. I had to stay vigilant, ready to move at any moment. The rustling sound outside the cave made my heart skip a beat. I held my breath, straining to listen. The growls and footsteps that followed dashed any hope I had of safety. They were here. My moment of respite had been nothing more than a cruel joke. The fear surged back, stronger than ever. I bolted from the cave, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The forest became a blur as I ran, branches slapping at my face, the ground uneven beneath my feet. The pursuers' growls grew louder, closer, pushing me to run faster. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I found myself sinking into a patch of quicksand. Panic surged as I struggled to free myself, the cold, wet sand pulling me deeper with every movement. The more I fought, the faster I sank. The quicksand tightened its grip, a merciless trap in this nightmare forest. The growls of the pursuer grew closer. They were almost upon me. I was trapped, with no clear way out. My mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. I remembered reading once that struggling only made quicksand worse. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stop thrashing and slowly tried to reach for a nearby branch. My fingers brushed the branch, and I stretched further, straining with all my might. The branch was just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet impossibly far. The ground beneath me continued to shift, the quicksand pulling me deeper. My hope began to wane, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. In the distance, I heard the rustling of leaves, the crunch of footsteps drawing nearer. My pursuer was almost here. Panic flared again, but I pushed it down, focusing on the branch. Inch by inch, I managed to get a better grip. With a final, desperate lunge, I grabbed hold and pulled myself toward the solid ground. My arms burned with the effort, my body trembling with exertion. But slowly, agonizingly, I inched my way out of the quicksand. I collapsed on the solid ground, gasping for breath, my body covered in mud. The relief was short-lived. The growls were closer now, just beyond the trees. I forced myself to stand, my muscles screaming in protest. I couldn't stay here. The forest was relentless, and so was my pursuer. I stumbled forward, each step a struggle, my mind a haze of fear and exhaustion. The shadows seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering threats in the dark. The forest floor turned uneven again, rocks and roots hidden beneath the underbrush. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the rough ground. Pain flared, but I pushed myself up, refusing to give in to despair. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, the growls seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of my own labored breathing. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, I had lost them. But the forest had a way of dashing such hopes. A sudden rustle to my left made me freeze. My heart pounded in my chest, fear clawing at my throat. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the shadows. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness. My blood turned to ice. The pursuer had found me again. I backed away slowly, my mind racing for a plan. The ravine was to my right, a steep drop that offered no escape. The dense forest to my left was a maze of shadows and dangers. There was no clear path, no obvious way out. I was trapped between the abyss and the predator. The eyes moved closer, the growls growing louder. I could see the outline of the pursuer now, a dark figure moving with predatory grace. My mind screamed for a solution, any way to escape this nightmare. But there was nothing. No escape. No sanctuary. Just the relentless approach of my pursuer and the cold, unforgiving night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. The cliff edge was crumbling beneath my feet, the darkness below promising a swift end. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. All I could do was face the inevitable. The growls were right behind me now, the hot breath of the pursuer on my neck. With one final, desperate glance around, I prepared to fight. My body was exhausted, my mind frayed, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. Not while there was still a chance, however slim. The forest loomed around me, a silent witness to the unfolding nightmare. The pursuer lunged, and I threw myself to the side, the ground crumbling away beneath my feet. The dark figure stumbled, giving me a precious second to scramble to my feet. I grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it wildly as I backed away. The growls grew louder, more feral, and I knew I couldn't hold them off for long. The edge of the ravine loomed behind me, the ground giving way. I glanced down, the abyss beckoning. A fall from this height would be fatal, but the alternative was a slow, painful death. My mind raced, weighing the options. There had to be another way, some way to survive this. The pursuer lunged again, and I swung the branch with all my might. The impact sent a jolt through my arms, but it barely slowed them down. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on the loose gravel. The ground crumbled, and I felt myself falling, the darkness rushing up to meet me. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of the pursuer standing at the edge, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the cold, predatory gaze of the relentless pursuer. I awoke to a sharp pain in my side, the world spinning around me. I was alive, but barely. The fall had been brutal, leaving me battered and disoriented at the bottom of the ravine. The cold, hard ground pressed against me, every breath sending waves of pain through my body. Darkness surrounded me, oppressive and suffocating. The night had fallen, and with it, a new layer of fear. The shadows seemed to close in, every sound amplified by the stillness of the night. The rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal animals all felt like threats lurking just out of sight. I struggled to sit up, wincing as I assessed my injuries. My side throbbed with a dull ache, and my legs felt bruised and weak. But I was alive, and that was all that mattered. I forced myself to stand, using a nearby rock for support. The world swayed around me, and I had to take several deep breaths to steady myself. The ravine stretched out in both directions, its walls steep and unyielding. I felt a surge of hopelessness. How was I supposed to escape this? A low growl echoed through the ravine, and I realized with a jolt of terror that I wasn't alone. The darkness hid many dangers, and I was in no condition to face them. I grabbed a broken branch, using it as a makeshift crutch. Each step was agony, but I had to keep moving. Staying in one place was not an option. The growl came again, closer this time. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what was out there. My heart pounded in my chest, fear driving me forward. The terrain was treacherous, every step a potential disaster. Loose rocks and uneven ground made progress slow and painful. I stumbled on, each step a battle against the pain and the fear. The growls grew louder, more frequent, and I knew I was being hunted. The realization sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I had to find a way out of this ravine before it was too late. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I spotted a narrow path winding up the ravine wall. It was steep and treacherous, but it was my only hope. I took a deep breath and began the climb, my hands slipping on the damp rock. The path was barely wide enough for my feet, and one wrong move could send me plummeting back to the bottom. The growls continued, now accompanied by the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs. My pursuer was close, and they had found a way down. I couldn't afford to look back. Every ounce of my focus had to be on the climb. My muscles burned with the effort, my injured side protesting with every movement. I reached a narrow ledge and paused to catch my breath. The night was colder here, the wind cutting through my thin clothing. I shivered, both from the cold and the fear. Doubt gnawed at me. Was this all in my head? Could I trust my own instincts anymore? The forest had twisted my senses, made me see and hear things that weren't there. But the growls, the rustling, they were real. A rustle behind me sent a shiver down my spine. I forced myself to keep climbing, my hands gripping the rock with desperate strength. The path was steep, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. The growls were louder now, almost upon me. I glanced back and saw a shadow moving in the darkness, a dark figure climbing within human speed. Panic surged through me, and I pushed myself harder. The top of the ravine was just ahead, a sliver of hope in the darkness. I scrambled over the edge, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. The forest above was no less ominous, but it felt like a reprieve compared to the horrors of the ravine. I couldn't rest, not yet. The pursuer was still close, and the forest offered little protection. I forced myself to stand, my body screaming in protest. The shadows seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering threats in the dark. I stumbled forward, each step a struggle. The growls were behind me, a constant reminder that I was still being hunted. The forest floor was uneven, rocks and roots hidden beneath the underbrush. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the rough ground. Pain flared, but I pushed myself up, refusing to give in to despair. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, the growls seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of my own labored breathing. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, I had lost them. But the forest had a way of dashing such hopes. A sudden rustle to my left made me freeze. My heart pounded in my chest, fear clawing at my throat. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the shadows. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness. My blood turned to ice. The pursuer had found me again. I backed away slowly, my mind racing for a plan. The forest was a maze of shadows and dangers, and there was no clear path, no obvious way out. I was trapped, with the predator closing in. The eyes moved closer, the growls growing louder. I could see the outline of the pursuer now, a dark figure moving with predatory grace. My mind screamed for a solution, any way to escape this nightmare. But there was nothing. No escape. No sanctuary. Just the relentless approach of my pursuer and the cold, unforgiving night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. The forest loomed around me, a silent witness to the unfolding nightmare. With one final, desperate glance around, I began to run again, pushing through the underbrush, my body screaming in protest. The growls were right behind me, the hot breath of the pursuer on my neck. I had to find a way out. I had to survive. The night was dark and full of terrors, but I couldn't give up. Not now. Not while there was still a chance, however slim. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows deeper and more menacing. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with the effort. The growls were relentless, a constant reminder that I was being hunted. I stumbled through the darkness, the trees whispering threats in the wind. My mind raced, searching for any way out. The forest was a labyrinth, and I was its trapped prey. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. As I pushed through the dense foliage, a sudden drop appeared before me. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding. The ground fell away into another ravine, its depths shrouded in darkness. There was no way across. The growls grew louder, and I turned to face my pursuer. The dark figure emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with a predatory gleam. I backed away, my mind scrambling for a solution. There had to be a way out. I glanced around, my eyes landing on a narrow ledge that wound its way down the ravine wall. It was steep and treacherous, but it was my only hope. I took a deep breath and began the descent, my hands slipping on the damp rock. The pursuer followed, their movements fluid and relentless. I pushed myself harder, each step a battle against the fear and exhaustion. The ledge was narrow, the drop below fatal. One misstep could mean the end. The growls were right behind me, the predator closing in. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. As I reached the bottom of the ravine, I stumbled forward, my body trembling with exhaustion. The forest loomed around me, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I couldn't rest. Not yet. I pushed on, the growls growing fainter but never truly gone. The forest was a maze of shadows and dangers, and I was its trapped prey. But I couldn't stop. Not while there was still a chance, however slim. My body ached with every step, the darkness around me pressing in. I had escaped the immediate danger, but I knew it was far from over. The night was an oppressive blanket, the air thick with tension. My breaths came in shallow gasps, each one a reminder of the relentless pursuit that had driven me this far. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, each one hiding potential threats. I was injured, exhausted, and scared, but something deep inside me refused to give up. As I moved forward, a surge of determination washed over me. I couldn't keep running forever. I had to confront whatever was hunting me. The fear that had driven me this far now fueled a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. It was time to face my fears head-on. I couldn't let the pursuer dictate my fate any longer. I found a large rock to lean against, scanning the area for anything that could be used as a weapon. My eyes settled on a sturdy branch lying among the underbrush. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I tightened my grip, the rough bark digging into my palms. This would have to do. The forest was eerily silent, the shadows deep and menacing. Every rustle, every whisper of wind sent chills down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the fear that gnawed at my mind. I crouched low, trying to make myself as small as possible. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I knew they were out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, my senses on high alert. The darkness seemed to close in around me, the shadows shifting and swirling in my peripheral vision. My breath was shallow and rapid, my muscles tensed and ready to spring into action. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a night bird. Then, I heard a faint rustle, the sound of footsteps approaching. My heart leaped into my throat, and I gripped the branch tighter, my knuckles white. The pursuer was close. I could feel it. My body trembled with fear, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to be ready. This was at the moment of truth. The pursuer emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. They moved with a fluid grace, their silhouette a dark blur against the night. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry with fear. This was no ordinary hunter. There was something almost supernatural about them, something that sent a shiver down my spine. I swung the branch with all my might, the impact sending a jolt through my arms. The pursuers staggered back, but quickly regained their footing. They were relentless, their eyes locked onto me with a cold, calculating gaze. I swung again, but they dodged with inhuman speed, their movements almost a blur. As we fought, I caught a glimpse of their face in the moonlight. Recognition and horror dawned on me. It was someone I knew. My mind reeled with the revelation. How could this be? The realization sent a jolt of terror through me, but also a surge of determination. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was personal. We grappled on the forest floor, each of us fighting with everything we had. My strength was waning, but I refused to give up. The fear and paranoia that had driven me this far now fueled my resolve. I couldn't let them win. Not now. Not ever. With a final, desperate push, I managed to knock the pursuer to the ground.